Example of your range.
Yeah. Man. Just to tell you how, again, most of you may know this, but the scene from the last scene, what was that?
Project X.
Project X, thank you. Just how that scene came into being. One of the things they do with movies is before they release them, they will preview them to audiences in various cities, and they'll get audiences to fill out cards with responses to them. And what happens after this scene is Matthew Broderick is in the office of the colonel or whatever it is, and he's telling him the exact story that I just told him in this scene. But they didn't do that when they made the movie, and when they previewed it, people didn't know in that scene that he was lying. So what they did was they wrote the scene that I was in and shot it post-production. And it, for me, is wonderful because it's the first part I ever did that I got called up and asked to do it. My friend Julie Selzer was a casting director, and I did makeup for quite a while in Los Angeles on various TV shows, and at that time I was working on a show called All in the Family, and she called onto the set, and it's very odd because they're not used to the makeup man getting a call on the set. And one of the production assistants came slightly perturbed and said, "You have a call." And so I went, and it was Julie, and it was very unexpected. And she said, "We want you to do this thing tomorrow. Can you do it?" And I said, "Well, yeah." She said, "Good, because I want you to meet Jonathan," who's Jonathan Kaplan, who was the director. Again, he's not there. I don't know why I'm doing this. And so that was very exciting for me.
You brought up something I kind of skipped over at the beginning. Robert Schiffer. Who was Robert Schiffer?
Oh,
and what did
thank
he
you.
do for you?
Well, Robert Schiffer is my showbiz hero, and this is not easy, but other than my father, is the finest man I've ever known. When I was in graduate school at a place called the California Institute of the Arts, it was a school that Walt Disney conceived and the Disney family poured a ton of money into. So they were very involved in the school, and one of the things they did was they had people from the Disney studio come up to the school to teach classes. A lot of the animators came up, and people in various forms of production and producers and things like that, and talked to people. And Mr. Schiffer came up to teach the graduate and senior theater students makeup, so that when we went out at that time, back then, and maybe still so, a lot of theater, the actors do their own makeup. And we got along. Turned out we had the same birthday, his a few years before mine. Not as many as I'd like, but still a few years before mine. And so after the first year, a very small group of us called him up and said, "Can we go down to the studio?" And he said yes, so we did that. And then after I was done, he said, "Stay in touch," and I did. And when I went back out there to start out, he called me up one day and said, "Look, there's a rule in the makeup union that if everybody's working, we can hire non-union people. And everybody's working, so do you want to work?" And I said yes. And I literally showed up on a professional movie set with a fishing tackle box with my little makeup stuff in it. And one of the first things he did was get me a real honest makeup case. But he put me on movies with Tommy Cold, did anybody here remember the original Mickey Mouse Club?
Yes.
Tommy! Remember him? That's Tommy Cold. So he was the head guy on that, and then I worked a lot with a really amazing man named Lynn Reynolds. And there was a contract dispute that got settled, but as part of the settlement, two studios, Paramount and Universal, who had not signed the original contract and signed the new contract, made a stipulation that anybody who had worked 30 days or more for one producer got in the makeup union, no questions asked. Now, back then, it took like years and years and years for people to get into the makeup union as either a makeup artist or a hairdresser. And when we were leaving the studio one day, Tommy said to me, "You ought to check on this. You might have enough days." And I said, "Fine, thank you." And I checked, and I had 31 days at Disney. So I got in the makeup union, no questions asked, and then Mr. Schiffer took over and got me a lot of work on features and things like that, and I was able to have every actor has a second job, be as a makeup artist, which paid a lot more money than any other job I could have had, and gave me a lot of time off to get turned down by just scores and scores of agents and casting directors.
And you got to work on the TV show Alice for a long time and Family Ties. Where
I got on Alice because Mr. Schiffer's secretary at the time was also studying to become a makeup artist and managed to get in, and she called me up and took me on Alice, and I did 4.5 years there, and then I worked on Family Ties for another 4.5 seasons. I worked a little while with a really terrific guy named Bruce Hutchinson on Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, and it went on from there. But
he's got hundreds of these stories. I love it. Just real quickly, since we brought up Michael J. Fox, I love it. You were talking about your second job was doing makeup. Most actors wait tables. They'll do anything that they can just drop and go work, in between the acting jobs. What did Michael J. Fox do up until the time he got cast on Family Ties? What was the last minute? What was he doing?
the last minute?
Well, you told me a story about how close he came to maybe not getting that job and maybe having to leave Los Angeles.
Well, I can only tell you when I first met Michael was on a Disney film called Midnight Madness, which was supposed to be Disney's version of Animal House, which, is an oxymoron right there, because there can't exist such a thing as a Disney version of Animal House. It just doesn't work. But it was one of these things with all these groups of people running all around Los Angeles doing all these crazy things. And there was a really terrific actor named Eddie Deason on it, who I don't know how many of you remember from, he was really famous for being in Grease and a lot of other things, but if you either know who he is or you don't. But at the time, he was the guy that everybody was going, wow, this is amazing. This guy's going to be the next Jerry Lewis and all this stuff. And my one and only example of Hollywood prescience is that I said, because Michael was in this group of the kind of the nerdy guys, and I said, this is the guy you got to be paying attention to. He's really good. And like everything else, he got to where he was ready to go back to Canada. And fortunately, the lady who was the casting director at Family Ties, Gary Goldberg created and wrote and produced, executive produced Family Ties, and she literally overruled Gary Goldberg and said, no, this is the guy, meaning Michael. This is the guy. He said, but we don't like him. He said, this is the guy. And, and the show took off because of Michael. But he was very close to getting back to Canada.
I remember one story you mentioned that he didn't have a telephone, so when he had to leave, call me, it was like the store downstairs. He didn't even have a telephone.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to Arnold Schwarzenegger. We'll see a little bit of a clip of a film where you are the computer expert that basically, goes. You go through a reality TV show. You go through a reality TV show where you almost get killed, and literally save Arnold Schwarzenegger. So, Richard, please start the next segment.